Vil is a failing student at a prestigious magic academy, but since he lacks any form of magic, he makes up for it by using a sword to strike down his enemies. One day in class, Professor Edward is giving a lesson on how people can produce fire with the aid of catalysts and some magic. But of all the students in class he could choose from, he decides to call on Vil to demonstrate the experiment, knowing he is unable to use magic. He does this because he is a high-level hater, but Vil has no choice but to obey his order, so he walks up to the front of the class and begins trying to make the spell work, but predictably, nothing happens, so the whole class wastes no time in mocking him for his repeated failures. Edward tells them all to calm down. That's just because he wants to personally roast Vil for being incapable of such a rudimentary spell. Vil excels at magical theory, but he has no magical talent whatsoever, so Edward despises him for thinking he can attend magic school without any magic. One student in his class casts the fire spell from his seat to ignite the catalyst in front of Will, and while Edward isn't concerned for Will's safety at all, it would still be bad for his record if his student burnt to death, so he asks Cheyenne to refrain from doing reckless things like that in the future. Cheyenne apologizes and says he was just trying to help a little since Vil obviously isn't going to be able to do the demonstration. But with that said, Edward concludes the experiment and begins a speech about how magic is supreme in this world, so people who have no talent for it have no right to exist in this magic academy. And all this is said while making direct eye contact with Will. After class, Vil feels exhausted from all the hate he was getting, but people love hating on him, so Cheyenne follows him out of class to continue messing with Will. Luckily, there are still some people who are on Vil's side as Colette comes running to his defense. Cheyenne asks why Colette is defending Vil when she's an honors student and Vil is half a point away from dropping out of school, but she says that doesn't matter since Vil is the nicest person she has ever met and he works much harder than any of them ever have. Cheyenne is stunned for a moment, but then he begins laughing since no matter how kind or hardworking Vil is, it won't change the fact that he can't use magic, and Vil is certainly never going to become Magia Vendor without magic. Cheyenne and his friends leave Vil alone for now after that, so while walking together, Colette tells Vil not to be bothered by what Cheyenne and Professor Edward were saying since they just did it to humiliate him, but Vil says it's fine since he really isn't able to use magic, and besides, he considers himself lucky since their hating made a cute girl like Colette want to hang out with him. Colette gets embarrassed when he says this, so she tells Vil that flattery isn't going to make her want to go out with him, but Vil says he was just stating a fact since he thinks Colette is really cute. This gets Colette even more embarrassed, and she nearly falls for Vil on the spot, so she pushes him away for a bit so she can think clearly and remain calm. She is technically a noble, so she can't let herself fall in love so easily. After regaining her composure, she looks over to Will, but he is busy looking at the sky since it is especially beautiful today. Long ago, the people of this world lived in a constant shroud of darkness, in fear of the celestial host who ruled over them. However, that all changed when the Shadow Wizard Money Gang joined forces to oppose the Celestial and bring the light of the sky to everyone. These wizards came to be known as the Magia Vendor, and they are regarded as the epitome of magic, so no mages alive to date have ever been able to live up to the title. Colette wonders if the Ice Maiden, Albus Vina, is watching over them right now, and Vil says he is sure she is, because he knows for a fact that she is looking at them right now from her window at the top of the world. Back when Vil was younger, he had a childhood friend called Elfaria, and she would tell him all about the sun and moon she read about in her books. She was especially excited to see the sunset since it is supposedly really pretty, so she hoped they could become Magia Vanders together someday and see the sun together. Vil promised to become a Magia Vander with her, but while it may have just been a promise between children, Elfaria actually worked hard to make it happen, and soon enough, she had climbed to the top of the tower through all her hard work. In contrast, Vil had no talent at all to keep his promise, yet he is still trying his best to make it up the tower, even if it is just a delusional dream. However, even with his rock-solid resolve, it doesn't stop him from crumbling like a cookie when he gets scolded. Vil asks Professor Werkner to calm down a bit, but Werkner is rightfully angry since Vil went into the dungeon again despite knowing how dangerous it was. And all the way down to the 7th floor, too. He is worried Vil will end up getting himself killed at this rate, so Vil begs him for forgiveness, but he also asks if he can get his extra credit now. Werkner is still mad at him for going into the dungeon alone, but Vil was able to return with proof that he killed an evil guard, so he is awarded with 2 points of extra credit. Vil celebrates with his pet while Werkner gets the paperwork ready, but as he does so, he asks Vil if he still hasn't given up on becoming a Magia Vander. In order to become one, Vil would first need to advance to a higher institute, and to do that, he would need a total of 7,200 credits. Normally, students would accumulate these credits in subjects like writing, praxis, and spell work, but since Vil can't use magic, he will never earn any credits from spell work. Vil is already aware of this, which is why he wanted to make up for it by doing extra work in praxis, but Worker has already explained to him that it is practically impossible to earn enough credits to pass through praxis alone. Vil realizes his chances are slim, but he still wants to hold on to hope that he can fulfill his promise of becoming a Mangiavander. In any case, Worker tells Vil that Mangiavander is a long way off and may not even graduate if he doesn't start earning more credits. Worker heard that Vil failed to earn any credits during his last exam, so unless he wants to flunk, he has to earn an additional 4 credits by the end of the week. Vil is shocked because that means he only has 2 days left before the deadline. So with no other options left, he begins searching his notes in hopes of finding a monster he can kill that is worth 4 credits. He's really desperate to find something, so while Workner doesn't want to encourage Vil to go into the dungeon, he tells him about a Baskerville monster on the 6th floor of the dungeon, and Vil hasn't submitted that one yet, so he could get the required credits from killing it. Vil runs up to Worker to hug him as thanks for all the help he has offered him, but Worker tells him not to cling so tightly because it could put his job on the line. Unfortunately, Cheyenne happened to be outside Worker's office during the whole conversation, so he knows that Vil is planning to go into the dungeon to slay a Baskerville, and as a true hater, he plans to head down there to kill it first, so Vil won't be able to get enough credits to remain in the school. A while later, Vil arrives on the 6th floor of the dungeon, and he is in a pretty good mood since he's fought at Baskerville before, so it should be an easy win for him. His pet doesn't think it's a good idea for Vil to go into this with so much confidence, but Vil says there's nothing for him to worry about since as long as he is careful about the Baskerville's flame breath, he won't get burnt to a crisp like last time. But in order to find the Baskerville, he is depending on Kiki to sniff it out. Meanwhile, Cheyenne and his friends are on their hating-ass mission to ensure that Vil drops out of the academy. His friends are equally hating on Vil, so they plan to kill the Baskerville first, and after that, they'll beat up Vil to send a message. They are all on board with the plan, but one of his friends asks if it is really safe for them to be this deep in the dungeon when it's only 3 of them here, but Cheyenne takes offense to the question, saying he is more than enough to keep all of them safe. The others let it go since they don't want to make Shan mad, so Cheyenne keeps walking while continuing to internally hate on Vil. In Cheyenne's opinion, someone who isn't able to use magic shouldn't even dare to speak of the Mangiavanders, so the very sight of Vil offends him. Once they've gotten deep into the dungeon, Cheyenne turns around to brief his friends on what they need to do. But a second later, one of his friends gets punched so hard that he slams into a wall, and there's no way that dude survived this. Cheyenne remains calm as he faces the monster, but the other guy starts freaking the hell out. Vil hears the shrieks of the guy, and he instantly realizes that someone must be in trouble, so he rushes over to help. He can't believe there are other people this deep in the dungeon, but from the sound he just heard, they can't be too far away. As Vil arrives at the sight of all the screaming, he hides behind a wall and spots someone desperately shooting fireballs at the monster while pissing their pants, but none of his attacks are having any effect. That monster is an evil sentinel, and from what Vil knows, is worth 10 points. Vil has never seen one in person before because the sentinel's habitat should be deeper down in the dungeon, so it makes no sense why it would come up to the 6th floor. More importantly, the person it is attacking is Cheyenne, and none of his spells are having any effect on the sentinel, so he doesn't stand a chance. The first thought that comes to Vil's mind is to go save Cheyenne, but then he takes a moment to think and comes to the conclusion, nah, f*** him. He's been hating on him since day one, so why should Vil feel any obligation to save him now since no one would know if he just left him to die? He's about to close his eyes and pretend he was never here, but then he has a flashback to a time with Elfaria when she told him that she liked how kind and brave Vil was, which is why she gave him a pair of goggles as a gift. Vil still had that same pair of goggles to this day, and if he wants to continue being the same person Elfaria has always liked, he has to put his personal grudges aside and save Cheyenne, even if he is a bitch. As the sentinel is about to kill Cheyenne, Vil jumps in and blocks the strike with his sword. At the same time, back in the academy, Professor Edward comes running into Worker's office to tell him that Cheyenne and his friends have all gone into the dungeon together without permission. He wants Worker to use his familiar to track them down before they get themselves killed, so Worker grabs his bird and asks what floor Cheyenne went to. Edward answers that they should be on the 6th floor, and as soon as Worker hears that, he is relieved since that means Vil is with them, and as long as he is there, he can handle any monster that attacks. He uses his crystal ball to show Edward what Vil is doing right now, and he is going toe-to-toe with the Sentinel, and he is absolutely blitzing it. In the blink of an eye, Vil has already chopped off one of the Sentinel's fingers, and when the Sentinel tries to counterattack, he blocks the strike mid-air and backs up to create some space. Vil then dashes in once more, and the Sentinel can't keep up with him at all. So before it even realizes what's going on, Vil has already gotten on top of it and stabbed into its shoulder. Cheyenne can't believe what he's seeing since he never thought Vil would be this so strong. Even Edward is left in shock, so Worker explains to him that Vil is an amazing anomaly. He possesses superhuman strength that a mage could never hope to achieve. He has a body that's more durable than a Nokia phone and unbelievably accurate observational skills that allow him to grasp an enemy's strategy and form countermeasures for it after being attacked once. So as the Sentinel tries to slash Vil again, he is able to perfectly predict the attack and dodge, while also slicing off the Sentinel's arm in the process. Vil may not be able to use magic, however. He is more than capable of making up for it with his sword. As the Sentinel writhes in pain, Vil proceeds to grab the Sentinel's sword with one hand and prepares to finish off once and for all. The Sentinel fires off a plasma blast as its last-ditch effort, but a single swing from Vil's sword is far more powerful, so Vil slices the Sentinel in half, claiming his victory. Once it's all over, Vil walks over to Cheyenne to ask if he is okay, and Cheyenne still has a grudge against Vil, but Vil just saved his life, so he bites his tongue. However, even after witnessing that whole fight and how capable Vil is, it doesn't stop Edward from hating one harder since he won't stand for Magicless being stronger than students with magic. Edwards leaves Worker's office in a rage, and while Worker is proud of Vil for saving Cheyenne, he is still mad at him for putting himself in danger. However, once again, he managed to defeat the monster, so Worker awards Vil with 10 points for killing the Sentinel. 5 years ago, Vil was the laughingstock of the whole school due to his lack of magic, and apparently the only reason he was allowed to enroll here in the first place was because he was friends with Elfaria. But since she had already become a Magiavander at the time, there was no reason for the school to pretend to be nice to him anymore. Vil has had to endure all the ridicule this entire time, but it hasn't stopped him from working hard to graduate regardless. Worker accompanied Vil to be evaluated by the headmistress, and she obviously had her doubts about whether Vil was cut out for this school or not. But once she hands him a sword and begins the test, Vil is able to counter each and every one of her fire spells within a fraction of a second. She is so impressed that she says Vil is allowed to stay at the school, and Workner is a bit surprised since he didn't think it would be this easy to convince her. It is true that Vil doesn't have any magic, but more importantly, she thinks it'll be fun to have someone like Vil around. Vil asks the headmistress if he can be by Elfie's side again if he becomes strong enough, and she tells him that he will have to work really hard and remain unfazed by the challenges along the way, but even then, there's no guarantee. But as Vil leaves, she remarks that it'll be fun to see what Vil can accomplish. Back to the present, Vil is currently in Worker's class as he teaches everyone about the Tower of Magic. Climbing the tower means advancing to the upper institute to the topmost floor where you will become a Magiavander. As of now, there are currently 2 methods to becoming a Magiavander, and that's either to create a new type of magic or to earn over 7,000 credits in this school, but it is pretty rare to invent new magic, so students usually focus on earning credits. However, since this is a remedial class, everyone in here is in danger of flunking out of school, especially Vil. After the classes are over, Colette meets up with Vil and asks how Vil is feeling since Worker's remedial classes are notoriously strict. Vil agrees that Worker is a strict teacher, but to be honest, he is glad Worker is kind enough to offer remedial classes in the first place since most professors wouldn't bother to do so. As they are turning a corner, they notice a commotion going on, so they listen in and hear Xian's friends glazing him for defeating the evil Sentinel. They won't question how he survived, but somehow by the time he woke up, the only thing Mars saw was Xian and a defeated evil Sentinel, meaning Xian had to have defeated it. Everyone believes Xian is amazing for being able to kill a monster as powerful as an evil Sentinel, but deep down, Xian knows he's a fraud since the one who actually defeated it was Vil. Just then, he notices Vil walking by and he takes that as a personal insult, so he goes to Vil and starts picking a fight with him again. However, it's a lot harder for him to see Vil as inferior when he knows Vil could easily one-shot him right now. He's just choosing not to. He lets go of Vil's jacket and begins walking away without saying a word. So once Xian is gone, Colette asks Vil if something happened between the two of them, and something definitely happened. At the same, Edward has just barged into Headmistress Cauldron's office and is demanding that Vil be expelled immediately. Cauldron asks why Edward suddenly wants to expel Vil out of the blue. He's already in his 6th and final year at the academy, so they can't just expel him without a reason. Edward tries to argue that Vil can't be allowed to stay at this school since he is a warrior, not a mage, and he won't stand for someone who can't use magic trying to surpass it. Cauldron pulls out Vil's records and points out that Vil has outstanding scores in his writing, and his magic reports are incredibly insightful, so aside from the fact that he can't use magic, he is the definition of a perfect student. If his dream were to become a Magiavander, then he could easily excel at any other profession he chose, and it is the Academy's duty to produce people of learning for the fated day. However, Edward states that the fact Vil wants to become a Magiavander is the problem, and Cauldron can see Edward's points, so she proposes a solution. She tells Edward to go and personally test Vil, and if Vil cannot pass Edward's test, then he's free to expel him if he wants. Edward asks if Cauldron is sure she wants to leave Vil's test up to his #1 hater, and Cauldron says she's fine with it since it won't make a difference. If anything, she thinks it will be more entertaining to have the one known as the Dark Viper Mage test Vil. Back on Vil's end, he is getting ready for his next class and asks Colette to help him open his locker for him. She happily does so, and he apologizes for having her do this for him all the time since he can't use magic. She says she doesn't mind, but then she notices Vil's sword in his locker and asks him if he's still training with it. Vil says he is, but he couldn't get permission to use it while he's in school, and back in his dorm, his roommate wouldn't let him do anything dangerous. He and Colette later head to the library to study together, and Vil is taking it very seriously despite having already learned this topic before. Colette tells him to take it easy since he's already at the top of the class in writing, but Vil says he needs to keep studying his hardest since he can't afford to lose a single credit. And besides, he enjoys learning history from the perspectives of the other races, especially since he can relate to the dwarves. They marched to war against powerful mages, but they never gave up in spite of the challenge. Just then, Colette notices that Vil has a white strand of hair on his head, and she says it's probably because he is overworking himself. She offers to pluck it out for Vil, and even though Vil says she doesn't need to, she still really wants to do it. However, in the middle of their flirting, Edward shows up behind Vil and tells him to come to the spell hall alone because there is something he needs to do. A little while later, Vil arrives at the spell hall and Edward says that he will be offering Vil a special remedial class, so he should be grateful for it. Will can't believe Edward would offer him a remedial class, but that still shows that he has no good intentions. He wants to see what Vil can really do, so he fires a warning shot to let Vil know that this is serious and tells him that if he's able to successfully land a blow, then Edward will award him 5 spell work credits. Otherwise, if he fails, he will immediately be expelled. He also tells Vil that he is not allowed to refuse this test either, so he begins casting a spell to take Vil out. Meanwhile, Worker has just been summoned to Cauldron's office, and she apologizes for calling him here on such short notice, but she thought Worker should be informed of what Edward is doing. She casts a spell to show him the test Edward is giving Vil, and she forbids Worker from interfering for any reason. She believes it's only fair that Edward gets to have his request granted since Worker got the same when he asked to watch over Vil. Still, Worker thinks it is too cruel to let Edward of all people be the one to test Vil because he is a man who nearly became a Magiavander. He may have failed, but he still possesses power that is equivalent to one, so Vil is in serious danger right now. So far, Vil has been able to avoid getting hit by Edward's spells, but Edward has only been using low-level black magic so far, so Vil can't believe how much power Edward is producing. Vil has to fight back somehow, so he tries to run up behind Edward and land a kick. But Edward is easily able to block it with a shield spell. The shield is too strong for Vil to break it unarmed, and Edward calls him hopeless for thinking he could get through a magic shield with a kick. Edward then blasts him away, and Vil is starting to worry that there may be no way for him to win, as Edward is simply too strong for him to beat as he is now. Edward tells Vil that he will limit himself to 2 spells, one to attack with fire, and one to defend himself from Vil's crude attacks. However, even if it is only 1 attack spell, one who has mastered that 1 spell can outclass someone who has learned 1,000. Edward is simultaneously casting his fire spell, and Vil knows it will be bad news for him if he gets hit with that, so he starts running away, but Edward is still able to blast him regardless. And you can tell Edward is enjoying this because he looks like he is conducting a symphony of Vil's screams. Vil eventually falls to the ground and he realizes there's no way for him to beat Edward like this, but if he had his sword, he could at least hold his ground against Edward. Outside the spell hall, Colette had been putting her things away in her locker, and she was really worried about Vil since Edward asking Vil to come alone for remedial classes couldn't have been a good sign. All of a sudden, Kiki came running up into the room covered in Vil's blood, and she was trying to get to Vil's sword in his locker. So Colette realizes that something bad really happened to Vil and opens his locker, so they can go give him his sword. As Vil is lying on the ground, Edward is slowly walking towards him while saying that Vil could never hope to become a Magiavander if he can't surpass him here. Magic has always reigned supreme even in the past when dwarves went to war with the mages against an army of 10,000 dwarves. All it took was one mage to annihilate them all. The sword is never going to compare to the wand, but even if the odds are insurmountable, Vil still wants to become a Magiavander. He will do whatever it takes to achieve it. Edward can't understand why Vil would go to such lengths to become one, so he asks if Vil has some sort of noble goal that he wants to accomplish. So Vil tells him that he wants to be by the side of the girl he loves, but Edward thinks that's a stupid reason. It may seem ridiculous to Edward, but Vil made a promise to Elfie, and no matter what it takes, he wants to be able to watch the sunset with her. Just then, Colette arrives at the spell hall and throws Vil's sword to him, and now that he is finally armed, Vil is able to counter Edward's fire spell. Edward is shocked that Vil was able to cut through the spell, but he realizes it's because Vil's sword is special. Even so, he still intends to prove that Vil is no match for a mage. Vil is terrified of Edward's flames, and if possible, he would have run away from this fight a long time ago. But facing Edward is the only way for Vil to move forward, so he charges at Edward while dodging all his attacks, and since he is finally close enough, he slices through Edward's barrier and successfully scratches Edward's cheek. Edward is forced to admit that Vil has passed the test, so he awards him his 5 credits and walks away. Vil collapses to the ground out of exhaustion, and Colette runs up to congratulate him on his victory, but he is totally passed out. Cauldron praises Vil's performance, and Worker says his strategy of diving into the attack to close the distance and attack from a blind spot was brilliant. And what's even more impressive is that his sword strike was powerful enough to surpass Edward's shield, so Vil may have what it takes to become a Magiavander after all. In a flashback, we see the time Elfie gifted Vil his pair of goggles, and immediately after doing so, she had to say goodbye since she was going to the top of the tower. However, as she was walking away, Vil called out to Elfie and swore to her that he would find a way to climb the tower as well so they can be together. Even if the odds are against him and he can't use magic, Vil swears that he will keep his promise and see the sunset with her someday. Elfie was moved by Vil's speech, so she turned around with tears in her eyes and said she would wait for him as long as it takes, and as Elfie finally left, Vil vowed that this would be the last time he ever cries or acts pathetic again. Back to the present, Vil is currently busy with his paper deliveries since he's got to work a lot of jobs to pay for his tuition. While on his usual route, he happens to run into Danon, and he greets him warmly, wishing Vil luck on his delivery route. He also says he will be visiting the tavern later today, so Vil tells him he will be waiting for him. As Vil runs off to finish off his deliveries, he ends up tripping on some steps and spilling the newspapers all over the place. But that is not a problem, since with his speed, he is easily able to pick all the papers out of the air and avoid falling over. He happened to miss a newspaper, so he walks over to pick it up, but as he does so, he notices an article about Elfie and how she has created yet another type of original magic. She is the first person to create 12 different original magic spells, and Vil is happy to see that she's still working hard up there, so he's going to work hard here as well. He's about to get moving again, but then he notices that there's another section in the article that says Elfie has personally passed a request to the academy, and he totally freaks out over it. He immediately runs over to his dorm room and begins asking his roommate Rusty if he can help him make a magic item on short notice. Rusty asks what the huge rush is, so Vil tells him about the request Elfie put in, and he wants to be the one to handle it. He doesn't have any lessons today, so he is free to prioritize the request and starts getting dressed. The job is to gather Frostwalker ice cores since she apparently needs a lot of magic catalysts, and all participating students are going to be compensated accordingly, so Vil just needs Rossi's magic items to help him. Rossi jokes that Vil is really straightforward with his request, but he has no reason to refuse, so he hands Vil his new and improved magic items, which Vil is very thankful for. Down on the 4th floor of the dungeon, Vil has just arrived to begin gathering ice cores, but there are already a ton of students here to do the same thing. Still, Vil expected as much since Elfie is famous, so he is going to give it his all. However, just as he is about to start, a huge explosion rings out in the cave, and it looks like it was caused by Xian, who just blew up a bunch of Frostwalkers. His friends praise him for his display of skill, but internally Xian is agonizing over the fact that he is still nowhere near the level of strength Vil showcased that day. As Vil sees Xian, he is honestly impressed by the magic power he used, although he seems really angry about something. In any case, with all these students here, Vil will never get the chance to slay any Frostwalkers, so his only choice is to go deeper into the dungeon floor. As Vil descends, he ends up seeing a girl in danger, so he leaps into action, and moments later, all 3 monsters have been sliced in half. The girl is shocked by what she just witnessed, since this is the first time she has seen a magic student use a sword to fight. Vil asks her if she's alright, and after the initial shock has worn off, she says she's fine and introduces herself as Iris. We cut to a lecture with Werkner where he is talking about the great achievement of creating new magic. It is an accomplishment so grand that it warrants unconditional advancement up to the top of the magic tower, and new magic is usually named after the person who created it or from words associated with them. For example, the dark magic spell Dax Darbicans that Edward used is named after a mage from ancient times called Fire Watchman Darbicans. So if any one of the students here manage to create new magic, they will be carving their names into history forever. A student raises her hand and asks Werkner if this means Elfaria is an amazing mage, and without a doubt, Werkner believes that Elfaria is unbelievably good at her magecraft. It is unheard of for a single mage to create 12 original spells by themselves, so it isn't a stretch to say that she is one of the greatest mages to ever live. After hearing about Elfaria's accomplishments, Colette has to admit that she is every bit as amazing as Vil had said she was, but her friend Rose starts teasing her for being jealous of Elfaria because she's in love with Vil. Colette gets embarrassed and yells at Rose for saying such ridiculous things, but that causes a disturbance in class. So Werkner turns around and tells her to sit down and be quiet. Meanwhile, down in the dungeon, Vil and Iris are walking along a passage, and after Vil had introduced himself to her, she recalls hearing about him since she was told about an upperclassman who couldn't use magic, nicknamed the Unprecedented No Talent. Vil is shocked to hear that people actually call him that, but he also notices that Iris referred to him an upperclassman. So she explains that she is only 14, meaning she's 2 years below Vil right now. That makes her a fourth-year student, but Vil has something that he's curious about, so he asks her if she doesn't feel any disdain towards him due to his lax magic. But Iris doesn't see why she should dislike Vil for something like that, especially when he saved her a few minutes ago. Even if he can't use magic, she has a heartfelt respect for people who have their own special talents. Vil gets a bit flustered, so he changes the subject and asks Iris if she's here because of Elfie's request, and Iris confirms it, saying she wants to be of use to the Magiavander and someday she hopes to become one of the people to hold up the sky. And she isn't speaking metaphorically, by the way. In this world, people aren't able to see the real sky because their world is hidden. The tremendous energies of the Magiavander cover everything and create a false sky known as the Great Barrier, and according to the legends, when the Great Barrier falls, the world will once again be enveloped in darkness and a great calamity will begin. That's why students are motivated to fulfill the requests of the Magiavander, not just because they admire them, but also because they believe it will help support their mission to hold the sky up. Iris mentions that she has actually had the honor of meeting Elfaria in person before, and Vil is surprised, so she starts telling him how it happened. She was cornered in the dungeon one day, and as her life had begun to flash before her eyes, she saw no way out. However, before she could be devoured, a burger wall of ice encased all the monsters that were attacking her, and she turned around to find Elfaria standing there and asking if she was alright. It was an experience she will never forget, which is why she wants to do everything she can to help Elfaria. However, even though she came to get the Frostwalker cores, she hasn't been able to find a single one, and her search spell isn't picking up anything either, so she assumes the other students must have defeated them all. But Vil doesn't think that's the case. He shows Iris an ice fragment that Frostwalkers leave behind when they move, and it's normally supposed to be around 1 millimeter, but this one is huge. That can only mean that there must be a powerful Frostwalker nearby, probably somewhere that Iris's search spell can't detect. Iris asks Vil how he could possibly know all this when he can't use magic, so he explains that he studies magic because he thinks it is amazing, but it's not almighty. Especially not inside a place like the dungeon, so he who lacks magic has to use all his knowledge, wisdom, and experience to make up for it. Iris asks what Vil means by experience, and seeing as they are standing in a large open room, Vil's experience tells him that there is about to be a boss battle. As the Frostwalker tries to sneak attack them, Vil dashes forward to get Iris to safety, and as she finally realizes what's going on, she identifies the monster as a Frostrex. A Frostrex is the highest form of a Frostwalker, and it's worth 6 credits on its own, so it's basically the special boss monster of the 4th floor. The Frostrex fires an ice laser towards them, so Vil jumps out of the way to avoid being frozen to death. He sets Iris down and asks her to stay back while he handles the Frostrex, but Iris warns him that physical attacks won't work against the Rex, as anything it touches will instantly be frozen. For that reason, close combat has been completely ruled out as an option, and it is generally believed that the only way to deal with it is with long-range magic attacks, but Vil isn't worried as he has a plan in mind to deal with the Rex. As it begins charging up another laser blast, Vil prepares the magic item he got from Rosti and charges forward at it. He evades the ice beam and lands behind the Rex before sliding underneath. The Rex can't keep track of Vil, so it begins firing in random directions, and while it's not paying attention, Vil uses the magic item to latch onto its body before dashing around the room to entangle it. Before long, he has completely ensnared the Rex in wires, and Vil states that the main weaknesses of Frost Rex are fire magic and explosive attacks. So as the Frost Rex is about to fire another blast at him, Vil activates the magic item and causes the wire to ignite, leading all the way back to the bombs that were attacked to the hook and causing a huge explosion. The Frost Rex is reduced to a pile of rubble, so Vil retracts the tool and makes a mental note to thank Rusty for his help later. Iris is stunned at what she just saw, but then her true personality comes out, and she remarks that Vil is far stronger than the rumors had led her to believe. She wonders how she should report her findings, but while she's thinking, Vil gets her attention and tells her they've gotten a really good ice core, so they can head back now, and Iris smiles in agreement to maintain her persona and avoid suspicion. A while later, Iris heads to the Wizard Tower, and as she is walking along the halls and taking off her disguise, she goes over what she learned from following Vil. He truly can't use magic, but he compensates for it in creative ways. That, along with his insane battle sense and experience, means that while he is not qualified to be a mage, he is an incredibly talented warrior. As she reaches the end of the hallway, she walks up to a huge door and opens it to meet with the Magiavanders. She asks them for a moment of their time and apologizes if she is interrupting something important, but Cariat tells her that there's no need to apologize since they were just having a boring meeting for the sake of it, but the situation is still dire since if the sky barrier were to be breached now, the world would certainly be destroyed. The celestial host that has been watching them from beyond the sky would overwhelm them instantly with the number of mages they have now, so they need to hurry and find more promising mages to aid the fight to come on that fated day. Otherwise, the calamity in the lore will come to pass, and they can't allow that to happen. They ask Iris how her observation mission went and if she happened to find anyone useful, and she confirms that she managed to find a promising person who could be useful to their cause. The no talent who can't use magic, Vil Surfort, and she recommends that he be inducted into the tower. Cariat and Eleanor are against the idea, but Z thinks it could be fun, while Elfie chooses to reserve her opinion on the matter. Z honestly doesn't care who it is as long as they are useful, but Eleanor thinks it would be crazy to bring a magicless person here. They are about to start a fight over it, but Cariat calms them down and says they don't need to make a decision now as the Grand Magic Festival will be occurring soon, and they can just use those results to decide. The useful ones will naturally end up in the top positions, so if Vil doesn't make it, then he wasn't cut out for the tower. With that, they call the meeting to a close and all teleport themselves out. And with Elfie being the only one left, she is happy to know Vil is still trying to keep his promise, so she says she will be waiting for him as long as it takes. As part of the next test the students have to participate in, they are all set to fight against golems, and if you manage to defeat one, then you pass. Shion and Colette are up first, and they both manage to defeat their golems with ease. Meanwhile, Vil is struggling against his. Vil tries running behind the golem in order to land a clean punch, but as the students see him about to attack with his fists, they begin mocking him for not being able to use magic, and this distracts Vil long enough for the golem to backhand him across the room. The students begin to leave after being satisfied by Vil's failure to defeat his golem, but on the other end of the room there are a few students who are having no trouble with the golems at all. They are Lehana and Wignall, and they both pass without a doubt, but there's one more student who walks up and begins casting ice magic. With a wave of his wand, he sends icicle shards into all the golems, causing them all to be encased in solid blocks of ice. This is Julius, and he is one of the top 3 students of the academy, along with the other 2. Lehana commends Wignall and Julius for keeping up with her and not slacking off, but the banquet is going to be starting soon, so there was never a reason for either of them to slack off. On that note, Julius says he would like to declare a friendly war on them, and he will use his newly mastered ultimate technique to deliver their defeat when the time comes. As a token of his sincerity, he offers an ice rose to them, but neither Wignall nor Lehana seem to be amused, although Wignall does seem to be looking forward to a face-off with Julius. These 3 are pretty much celebrities within the school because they are the only students who all have earned more than 10,000 of the total 12,000 credits. Some people think of credits as a reflection of a mage's capabilities, but Vil is nowhere near that level. Right now, he doesn't even have enough credits to graduate in the first place, and this is his final year in this school. As Vil is sitting there and wondering what he's going to do, Julius and his Glazers walk up to him and begin insulting him for his lack of magic ability, and Vil just gets out of his way to avoid causing any problems. As Julius and the others leave, Vil hears them talk about the Grand Magic Festival, and he hadn't realized it was that time of year already. Later that day during lunch, Colette comes up to Vil and tells him that his only hope of becoming a Magiavander is to get scouted at the Magic Festival. Attempting to graduate based solely on his praxis and writing isn't practical, and there have been cases of students getting scouted without having the 7,000 credits needed to graduate. The Magic Festival is a huge event that takes place once every 2 years. It holds several different events and draws in high mages from the Tower, who hope to scout promising talents. The festival is a place where the different magic factions fight over the right to recruit the best students, and it wouldn't be a stretch to say that admissions for the Upper Institute are decided during the festival. There are 5 factions: the Thunder faction, the Elf faction, the Fire faction, the Ice faction, and Mysterious Noah. All these factions, excluding Mysterious Noah, are led by their respective Magia Vanders, so if they scout you, it's a guaranteed promotion. Vil doesn't think it's likely that he will be chosen since he's already failing, and for him to even get noticed, he would have to have some kind of amazing magic that would put the high mages to shame. And while he's right about that, there are still other ways to get scouted. Colette has heard rumors that Watchers will come to look for talented students, but Vil thinks Watchers are just an urban legend. There's no way a Magicless no talent like him would have a place in the festival, so he's just going to stay behind the scenes and help with the preparations instead. Colette thinks that Vil could change the way people look at him if he entered the festival this year and showed them what he can do, but Vil still doesn't want to enter since it would end up becoming an athletics contest if he were there. He has tried entering the festival once before back in his second year, and he literally got booed off stage for using physical attacks. He got a bad reputation for that, and he still hasn't gotten over the humiliation of it, so he really doesn't want to enter. Students all over the school have begun practicing in earnest for the festival, and Colette reminds Vil that aside from the High Mages, many scouts from the capital will be there as well, so even if Vil can't earn a place as a Magia Vander, he could still get scouted for another career. The Magic Festival is a great place to showcase your abilities, so Colette really wants Vil to show everyone how capable he is. But Vil still doesn't think it's a good idea to participate without being able to use magic. Just then, Colette notices something strange, so she goes over to one of the other lockers and tells Vil that there's something off about it. It's well hidden, but she can sense a barrier here. Vil asks if she is sure it isn't just a locking spell for the locker, but Colette can tell that the barrier is made to block sound and obstruct view. Colette could break it with her magic, but that could be troublesome, so she asks Kiki to do it instead. Once the barrier is dispelled, they find a staircase hidden behind the lockers, which leads to a secret gambling ring. A bunch of students all gather here so they can place bets on who will come out on top the Magic Festival. Colette finds it deplorable that the students would turn their locker room into an illegal gambling ring, but then Vil notices Xian standing across from them, and he's surprised to see him here since Xian doesn't seem like the kind of guy who enjoys betting. Xian gets defensive and starts yelling at Vil to mind his own business, but Colette steps in and warns Xian that if he gets into a fight with Vil for no reason, then she will make sure he regrets it. Xian calms down, so Vil asks him again what he's doing here since he doesn't seem to be participating in all the betting. Xian doesn't feel the need to answer Vil's questions, but it's totally not like he came here to see whether people were betting on him or not, and he definitely isn't upset that no one thinks he has a chance of winning even though he's the 4th best student in the school. Sure, the top 3 students may have slightly more credits than him, but Xian's credit score is in the high 9,000s, and the only reason he ranks lower than the others is because he failed a writing test once. Since then, he has been working a lot harder to make up for the lost credits and catch up, but his magic skills are still on par with Lehana and the others, so he is just as likely to win at the festival as any of them are. Although, he doesn't know why he is trying to justify himself to Vil. After that, the rest of the day goes on like normal, and once classes are over, Vil gets up to leave. Before he goes, Colette gets his attention and asks if he is free after school because she would love to hang out with him, even if it's going into the dungeon together, but unfortunately, Vil has work to do tonight, so he won't be able to spend time with her today. Later that night, Vil is at Jana's restaurant on the outskirts of the city, and he's working as a waiter there. He brings a tray of food and drinks to Danan, and Danan feels bad for how hard Vil has to work all the time. He delivers newspapers in the morning, has classes during the day, and then has to work here at night. It's definitely hard, but Vil has to push through it since he doesn't qualify for the school's scholarship, meaning he has to pay for everything out of pocket. Danan mentions that he heard something about the Grand Magic Festival coming up soon, so he suggests that Vil could participate, but Vil immediately shoots down the idea because he doesn't want to get humiliated again. Jana yells for Vil to get back to work and points out that his friend is working much harder than him. We then see Rosti, who is also working as a waiter here, although he is only doing it for Vil as a favor to him since tonight is really busy and one of Jana's workers quit. And all that extra work is just going to get dumped on Vil's shoulders if she doesn't hire someone soon. After the dinner rush is over, Vil and Rosti are cleaning up the dishes, and Rosti asks Vil if he is really okay working here, because the wages he gets paid from the dwarves aren't that high. He could easily ask Worker to help him find a higher paying job, but Vil doesn't want to bother Worker too much, and besides, he likes the people here a lot, so working around them is fun for him. They are honest, caring, and shower him with warmth, so Vil respects them a lot. Things are going really well, but a few moments later is all ruined as Julius walks into the restaurant just so he can be a hater. As soon as he steps in, the first thing he does is start insulting the restaurant and the dwarves in it. Julius then notices Vil here and begins laughing to himself that a failure like Vil is only fit to be around barbarians like dwarves. This gets on Donan's nerves, but the other dwarves there hold him back because they can't afford to get into a fight with a mage. Julius begins threatening Donan not to try anything funny because he and all the other dwarves are just immigrants who fled here after the Celestials destroyed their world, and humans have been graciously allowing his kind to live here without issue, so a dwarf like him has no right to glare at Julius like that. Donan calms himself down because he knows there is nothing he can do, and everything Julius said about the dwarves being refugees is true since they fled here after their world was destroyed. But even though the same thing happened with the elves, dwarves are treated with contempt by the humans here. So if Donan were to attack Julius for what he said, all dwarves in the city would suffer consequences for it. That's just the way the world works here. But Vil can't stand for such injustice. He decides that today is going to be his last day working here. And since he is no longer employed at this establishment, Vil is free to do whatever the hell he wants without Gina having to face any consequences. And the first thing he does is go to Julius's table and tell him to take back what he just said about the dwarves. Dwarves are hard workers who made the best out of the harsh conditions they were given and thrived, so Julius has no right to call them barbarians. However, Julius couldn't care less about the dwarves or their struggles, so he kicks his plate of food at Vil, and his two groupies get up ready to beat Vil up. However, they fail to realize that a plate of food being thrown at him counts as assault, so anything Vil does from here on can be classified as self-defense, and Vil immediately grabs the two boys by the shirt and gives them first-hand knowledge of what the floor tastes like. Julius gets slashed in the process, and it's been a long time since he has suffered such humiliation, so he's going to make Vil pay for what he has done. The room begins to freeze over as Julius takes out his wand and begins to attack Vil. Vil jumps back to evade Julius's ice strikes, but he doesn't have his sword and is in an enclosed space, so eventually, Julius manages to trap him with ice and pin Vil to the wall. He then walks up to him and is about to freeze Vil solid, so Rosti is about ready to step in and save Vil. But before he freezes Vil, he looks into Vil's eyes, hoping to see him beg for his life, but Vil's eyes show no sign of fear, so Julius decides on a change of plans. Instead of freezing Vil here, he wants to do it at the Magic Festival, so he can thoroughly humiliate Vil in front of the whole school. Vil agrees to fight Julius in the Magic Festival, and Julius says that if he wins, he will have Vil kicked out of the school once and for all, but Vil just wants an apology from Julius to all the dwarves he disrespected when he wins. This was the end of episode 4. Subscribe to not miss the next part.